When the doors to Freddie Mercury's London home were opened to the public for the first time, no one was prepared for what lay inside. Behind ivy-covered walls and decades of silence, Garden Lodge wasn't just a rock star's mansion. It was a hidden museum of love, loneliness, and brilliance. From handwritten lyrics to surreal art and heartbreaking personal notes, what they found inside didn't just surprise the world, it moved it. His hidden world of intimacy, when the first visitors walked through Freddie Mercury's home at Garden Lodge, many expected extravagance. Velvet, gold, rock star drama. What they didn't expect was to come face to face with the raw, intimate fragments of a man who had kept his soul carefully hidden behind the loudest voice in rock history. The most shocking discoveries weren't the flashy things. Not the crown, not the stage-worn clothes, not even the extravagant art. It was the quiet stuff, the kind of objects that don't scream, but whisper. Whisper things the world had never heard from Freddie before. Take, for instance, the now iconic handwritten lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody. Scrawled on sheets of notepaper in Freddie's careful, dramatic penmanship, they show how the legendary 6-minute epic evolved from fragmented lines into the operatic masterpiece we know today. You can see the corrections, the experiments, the raw energy of creativity. But here's the kicker. One early draft includes a line that was completely cut, "Mama, there's a war outside." It's a window into the song that could have been. And it reminds us, even gods of music revise, doubt, and start again. That's when it hits you. These aren't relics. They're traces of life. And they're everywhere. In a quiet drawer, auctioneers discovered a bundle of love letters. Not from lovers, but from fans. Dozens of them preserved. Teenagers thanking him for helping them feel seen. Older fans sharing how Queen's music helped them through grief, illness, heartbreak. Some were never opened, sealed envelopes from 1984, 1986, waiting decades to be read. Whether Mercury read them or not, he kept them. That alone says everything. And then came something few expected, a collection of deeply personal Polaroids. These weren't red carpet snapshots or rock and roll moments. These were candid, off-stage, and often tender. Freddie lounging in silk robes, grinning with friends, feeding his cats, asleep on a couch. No makeup, no posing, just Freddie. Human, vulnerable, unfiltered. One particularly moving photo shows Mercury sitting at a piano alone, lit only by a desk lamp. It's dated 1987, the same year he was diagnosed with AIDS. His posture is slumped, and there's no trace of his usual theatrical flair. It's not morbid, it's intimate. This was a man still making music, even in the shadows of his own mortality. There was a birthday card from his longtime partner Jim Hutton, signed simply, "To my love, forever." And next to it, a silver frame with a picture of Mary Austin, the woman Mercury once called his common-law wife. Both photos stood side by side on his bedside table until the day he died. For all his fame, for all his lovers, this small gesture revealed what mattered most: love. And not the performative kind, the lasting, complicated, real kind. Even the objects that weren't inherently emotional took on new meaning through context. A small notebook filled with Mercury's daily to-do lists: call Mum, order flowers, pick up Japanese print from framers. Just like that, the legend shrinks to human scale. Suddenly, he's not the strutting icon in tights. He's a son, a collector, a man trying to get everything done before dinner. Perhaps the most powerful discovery, and the one that moved many visitors to tears, was found tucked in a drawer near his writing desk. A stack of farewell notes Freddie had written, but never sent. Most were undated, written in elegant cursive, some addressed to friends, others to no one in particular. One read, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say it in person. Don't mourn me with silence. Turn the volume up." No public statement, no grand exit, just these private goodbyes, waiting in the dark. It's easy to think we knew Freddie Mercury. The videos, the interviews, the concerts, they're burned into pop culture. But this was different. Garden Lodge wasn't just a home. It was a vault. A place where the real Freddie Mercury, the thoughtful, private, messy, funny, sentimental Freddie, still lived, in objects and in ink. The shock wasn't in the opulence. It was in the intimacy. We saw the artist before the performance, the man before the myth. And the world, for the first time, truly met him. For a man who once strutted across the world's biggest stages in rhinestone leotards and royal cloaks, Freddie Mercury's taste at home was surprisingly serene. Quirky, yes. Lavish? Absolutely. But not the chaotic, loud luxury you might expect from one of rock's most flamboyant frontmen. Instead, Garden Lodge revealed something unexpected: a collector's mind, a cat lover's heart, and an artist's eye for beauty. One of the biggest surprises was Freddie's obsession, and it really was an obsession, with Japanese art and antiques. We're talking about hundreds of pieces, delicate woodblock prints, lacquerware, silk kimonos, intricately carved netsuke, tiny ivory or wooden sculptures, and more porcelain than a museum wing. His collection wasn't just impressive, it was museum-grade. Sotheby's experts were stunned by the quality and range. Mercury didn't just dabble. He studied, curated, and knew exactly what he was buying. He once said, "I'm a collector. I've always been fascinated by the finer things in life. Japanese art has a balance and mystery I can't resist." Walking through his home felt like drifting through a Kyoto gallery, minus the red carpets and cameras. These pieces weren't there for show. They were deeply personal. They were the result of years of travel, quiet evenings, and a genuine love of craftsmanship. Even his dining room, where he hosted lavish dinners for Elton John, David Bowie, and Liza Minnelli, was arranged like a minimalist Japanese tea room, complete with low lighting, screens, and perfect symmetry. It wasn't flashy. It was peaceful. And maybe that's the real surprise. Behind the stadium anthems and theatrical costumes was a man who craved calm, order, and a little mystery. And then there were the cats. Freddie Mercury didn't just like cats. He worshipped them. At one point, he reportedly shared his home with 10 of them, each with their own room, toys, and wardrobes. Yes, wardrobes. Some were rescues, others were gifts. All of them were spoiled. Their names? Delilah, Goliath, Miko, Romeo, Lily, Oscar, Tiffany, and more. If you think this is cute, you're not ready for what was found inside Garden Lodge. He had custom oil portraits of his cats in ornate, gilded frames. One wall had a full photo gallery dedicated to their best moments. There were hand-painted dishes with their names, tiny sweaters, and birthday cards from Freddie to them, naturally. The song Delilah, a track from Innuendo, was written for one of his favorite cats, and the lyrics don't even try to hide it. "Delilah, you make me so very happy / you give me kisses, and I go out of my mind." Sure, it's adorable, but it's also revealing. These cats weren't just pets. They were family. They were company during long nights, laughter during illness, and quiet joy when the world outside got too loud. And in a home where very few people were allowed in after his diagnosis, the cats remained. Constant. Loyal. Loved. Of course, Freddie didn't abandon the flair entirely. He couldn't. Tucked between the serene Japanese pieces and the fluffy cat shrines were moments of pure Mercury magic, his custom-made crown and velvet robe, inspired by the real British monarchy, outrageous stage boots, and mirrored sunglasses. But even these were stored carefully, often in glass display cases or velvet-lined drawers. They weren't dumped in closets or boxed up like old costumes. They were preserved, almost like holy relics. Because to Freddie, everything had meaning. That's what made the home so astonishing. It wasn't just a house filled with things. It was a story told through objects. Each room was a chapter. Each item a sentence. Some were loud. Some whispered. But together, they painted a portrait that no biography ever could. And let's make this clear. This wasn't celebrity hoarding. This wasn't "look how much stuff I bought." It was curated, intentional, almost scholarly. Mercury treated his possessions like friends. Everything had a place. Everything was displayed, admired, respected. Even his wardrobe was an archive. Hundreds of neatly folded silk shirts, handmade jackets, and exquisite shoes, all arranged by color, designer, and occasion. Fashion wasn't just part of the performance. It was part of who he was. Freddie once joked that he dressed for dinner even when he dined alone, just in case anyone important, like himself, showed up. What struck many visitors, fans, and even professional appraisers was the emotional weight of these collections. Because when you see how someone lived, what they chose to surround themselves with, what they kept close, you start to understand them. And what Garden Lodge revealed was this: behind the thunderous voice and dazzling showmanship was a man who adored quiet beauty, found comfort in porcelain and purring, and built a world of meaning in every room. Freddie Mercury wasn't just a performer. He was a curator of his own universe. And thanks to these discoveries, the world finally got to step inside it. But what happened when this intimate world, so carefully guarded for decades, was suddenly put on display for the entire world to see? The auction that broke records and hearts when news broke that Freddie Mercury's personal belongings were going up for auction. Fans across the world were stunned. For decades, Garden Lodge had been a sealed sanctuary, a private world frozen in time by Mary Austin, the woman Mercury once called the love of my life. After his death in 1991, she inherited the home and everything in it, choosing to keep it exactly as he left it. For over 30 years, nothing had changed. And now, suddenly, it was all being revealed and sold. The auction wasn't just any auction. It was Sotheby's, one of the most prestigious auction houses in the world. They didn't just slap price tags on Mercury's belongings, they curated an entire exhibition, turning Garden Lodge into a cultural event. For weeks leading up to the sale in 2023, visitors from all over the globe lined up outside Sotheby's London galleries, waiting hours for a chance to walk through room after room filled with Mercury's possessions, laid out exactly as they had been in his home. It was surreal. You could stand inches away from his handwritten lyrics to "We Are the Champions," see the piano he composed on, admire his Japanese kimonos, and even peek at his beloved cat-themed salt and pepper shakers. It was like stepping inside his mind or his heart. And then the hammer started falling. The bidding war was nothing short of astonishing. Freddie's Yamaha Baby Grand Piano, the very one on which he composed many of Queen's greatest hits, sold for a jaw-dropping £1.7 million. The crown and red velvet robe he wore during Queen's final tour of 1986? Over £600,000. A simple silver Tiffany and Company mustache comb fetched more than £150,000, yes, for a tiny comb. One of his iconic stage jackets went for nearly £250,000. And those handwritten lyrics? Some sold for hundreds of thousands each, depending on the song. Some fans celebrated. Others wept. Because here's the thing. This wasn't just memorabilia. This wasn't just rock history. These were deeply personal artifacts, things Mercury had touched, lived with, loved. For many fans, the auction felt like a funeral in slow motion, a final disassembling of the world Freddie built for himself. Every item that left the auction floor felt like a goodbye. There were heated debates online and in fan forums. Some believe Mary Austin had every right to sell the items. After all, Freddie had entrusted everything to her. She had kept his legacy safe for decades. Maybe, they argued, it was time to share it with the world. Others saw it differently. It feels like watching someone sell off pieces of someone's soul, one fan wrote on Twitter. Another, more forgiving, said, "At least now we get to know him better." Before, all of this was locked away. Mary herself addressed the decision in rare public comments. She explained that she was now in her 70s and didn't want to leave the responsibility of Mercury's possessions to someone else. "Freddie was incredibly generous to me," she said. "It's time to pass that generosity on." She emphasized that she hoped the auction would allow fans to feel closer to him, and in many ways, it did. But there's a tension in that idea. Because while some items went to museums and collectors who promised to preserve them, many more disappeared into private hands. Pieces of Freddie's world, his favorite tea set, the painting that hung above his bed, even his final handwritten shopping list, were scattered. And with them went tiny pieces of context, of story, of connection. Still, there were moments of beauty in the chaos. A fan in Japan bought one of Mercury's art pieces, a delicate ukiyo-e print, and promised to donate it to a Tokyo gallery. A wealthy philanthropist acquired his iconic stage jacket with plans to tour it across schools and LGBTQ+ centers. And one anonymous bidder, reportedly a lifelong Queen fan, paid thousands for Mercury's favorite waistcoat and said simply, "I just wanted to give something back to him." For all the money involved, the auction was never really about wealth. It was about emotion. It was about the way Mercury's life touched millions, and how even decades after his death, people still longed to be close to him, to understand him, to own, even briefly, a part of his magic. There's something undeniably heartbreaking about watching a legacy be sold one lot at a time. But there's also something powerful about letting it breathe again. For years, these items sat in silence. Now they live new lives on display in homes, in museums, in memories. The auction may have broken records. But more than that, it broke hearts and opened them. And in doing so, it reminded the world of what Freddie Mercury truly was. Not just a performer, but a person. A collector. A lover. A friend. A mystery. And now, more than ever, a legacy you could almost touch. Beyond the auction, beyond the headlines, what did all of these objects really reveal about the man behind the legend? Identity, art, and the quiet power of Freddie. It's easy to get swept up in the glitter of Freddie Mercury's life. The sold-out stadiums, the 4-octave voice, the wild costumes, outrageous interviews, and unshakable charisma. But what the world found inside his home went far beyond rock star spectacle. It pulled back the velvet curtain to reveal a life deeply entwined with culture, identity, art, and history. These weren't just the possessions of a famous man. They were artifacts of a life that mattered to music, to culture, to history, and to millions of people searching for themselves in his story. One of the most fascinating revelations from the Garden Lodge collection was how deeply Mercury was invested in preserving beauty, not just physical beauty, but emotional, cultural, and artistic beauty. His extensive art collection, for example, didn't follow trends or chase status. It reflected an intensely personal aesthetic. Japanese woodblock prints, Art Deco glassware, Victorian silver, and even works by Salvador Dali lined his walls and shelves. This was a man who saw value in things that spoke quietly, and who surrounded himself with objects that told stories, even if no one else was listening. But this wasn't just about taste. It was about identity. Mercury, born Farrokh Bulsara in Zanzibar to Parsi Indian parents, grew up as a cultural outsider, first in East Africa, then in a British boarding school in India, and finally in England, where he crafted a new persona, name and all. The items in his home subtly reflected this layered identity: Persian rugs, Hindu figurines, Asian textiles. There was no single cultural narrative. There was only a mosaic, a blending of East and West, flamboyance and restraint, ancient tradition and modern rebellion. To understand the weight of that, you have to understand what Freddie Mercury represented, especially to people who lived on the margins. He was a queer man of color who rose to the absolute peak of a white, male-dominated industry. And he did it on his own terms. He was never fully out, in the way the modern world expects, but he never denied himself, either. He defied categories. He performed masculinity and femininity with equal fire. He blurred the lines between diva and rock god, between vulnerability and power. And in that ambiguity, he became a symbol of liberation. The items discovered in his home, and especially the more private ones, spoke volumes about that internal balancing act. On stage, he was electric, unapologetic, and wild. But off stage, there were hints of isolation, of quiet longing. There were carefully preserved photographs, handwritten love notes, and tender sketches. These weren't just celebrity curiosities. They were evidence of a queer life lived in full color, at a time when visibility could be dangerous. Remember, Mercury lived and died during the height of the AIDS crisis, a time when public figures were often forced to hide their identities out of fear, shame, or public backlash. His death in 1991, one day after publicly announcing he had AIDS, was both a tragedy and a turning point. It brought global awareness to the disease and forced the public to reckon with the cost of silence. But what his home revealed was the cost of living half-hidden, even at the top of the world. Some of the items found, a hidden stash of letters, a photo album with candid shots of partners, discreet notes scribbled with private thoughts, weren't just personal. They were historical. They told the story of how queer lives were documented, preserved, and protected in private when the public world refused to accept them. They reminded us that Mercury wasn't just a rock star. He was part of a much larger narrative, one of resilience, resistance, and survival. From a cultural standpoint, the Garden Lodge collection also reflected a man who understood legacy. Not just his own, but the legacy of everything he loved. His careful curation of furniture, his preservation of rare books, his handwritten notes attached to keepsakes, they weren't just habits of sentiment. They were acts of storytelling. Mercury knew he was building something that might one day be discovered, and he made sure it would speak for itself. What's remarkable is that the objects in his home span centuries and continents, from 18th century Japanese lacquerware to 80s pop art, from Persian calligraphy to hand-drawn sketches of his beloved cats. In a way, Garden Lodge became its own kind of museum. A museum of Freddie Mercury's mind, wild, brilliant, chaotic, tender, and defiantly his own. Historians, too, have begun to take these items seriously, not just as fan memorabilia, but as cultural artifacts. Museums have shown interest in acquiring select pieces for permanent exhibitions. Academic researchers have pointed out that Mercury's home offers one of the most complete windows into a queer, immigrant, artist's life in late 20th century Britain. That's not just rare, it's priceless. The cultural significance goes beyond just what he left behind. It's about how he lived and how that life touched others. The discoveries inside Garden Lodge helped demystify a legend. But more importantly, they helped humanize him. He wasn't just a voice, a body, a performer. He was a man who found comfort in beautiful things, who kept every letter from fans, who worried about his friends, who never stopped being a son, a lover, a seeker. Freddie Mercury once said, "I won't be a rock star. I will be a legend." He was both. But thanks to the treasures he left behind and the way they were finally shared with the world, we now understand that his legend was built not only in spotlights and stadiums, but in silence, in solitude, and in the sacred space of home. Hence, some stood in line for hours outside Sotheby's just to spend 10 quiet minutes among his belongings. People openly cried in front of his handwritten lyrics, lingered silently in rooms filled with his furniture, and whispered to each other as if they were in a sacred place. For many, it wasn't about the monetary value or the glamour. It was about connection. These were the objects that surrounded Mercury in his final years. This was the chair he sat in while listening to opera. That was the robe he wore to answer the door. These weren't props. They were remains. Online, the reactions were just as intense. TikToks, YouTube walkthroughs, Instagram stories, fans were documenting every inch of the exhibition. Some posted emotional breakdowns after seeing his piano. Others shared memories of how Queen's music saved them, healed them, or helped them come out. A surprising number of people compared the experience to visiting a shrine, not to a god, but to someone who had carried their pain in secret and made it sing. And that's the thing. Freddie Mercury wasn't a distant, untouchable figure. Not to his fans. He was one of them, queer, awkward, artistic, misunderstood, bold, afraid, and full of contradictions. And when his personal life was finally laid bare, the cat bowls, the letters, the shopping lists, the heartbreaks, fans felt closer than ever. What they found in his home didn't diminish the legend. It expanded it. But even as fans embraced this new, intimate image of Mercury, something else happened. The myth began to evolve. Before the auction, Mercury's legacy was largely shaped by the public. The record-breaking shows, the music videos, the biographies, the statue in Montreux, the tribute concerts, the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, for better or worse. But now, with the release of hundreds of deeply personal artifacts, a new kind of storytelling emerged, one told through objects, not headlines. It was fans, not just scholars or critics, who began piecing together the quieter story of who Freddie was when the cameras were off and the crowds had gone home. Suddenly, small items became sacred texts. His address book, his passport, a pair of well-worn slippers, a recipe written in his handwriting. These weren't just items. They were emotional time machines, transporting fans back to a man who once walked through a door, sat at a piano, poured tea, loved deeply, and feared dying. And what's more, they made people see themselves in him. For LGBTQ+ fans especially, Mercury's homecoming, because that's what it felt like, was monumental. It offered a rare, unfiltered view of a queer life in full, not sanitized, not tragic, not tokenized. Just real, flawed, glorious, private, powerful. He didn't have to come out in a press conference to matter. He lived his truth in every silk shirt, every porcelain cat, every love letter never sent. And now, fans could witness that truth, touch it, sometimes literally, and carry it forward. The fan response also sparked renewed discussion about how we preserve and honor celebrity legacies. Should everything be kept intact like Graceland? Should it be open to the public? Is selling it off a betrayal or an act of sharing? The debate will continue, but one thing is clear. The way Mercury's legacy unfolded through his home was unlike anything that had come before. It didn't just invite nostalgia. It inspired introspection.